Welcome back to the Pirate Republic. This is an audiobook presentation of Pirates of the Wild West, the first novel in the Storm of Time series, released one chapter at a time. Chapter 8. The Light of Day. Thatch opened his eyes in the fresh morning light to find an enormous rat sitting on his chest, twitching its nose at him. It seemed to be searching his beard for bits of food with its clever little paws. He quickly knocked it away with the back of his hand, sending it scurrying into a pile of wood that lay to the side of his makeshift bed of straw and burlap sacks. Thatch stood and brushed himself off, his mind clearing enough to remember how he had found himself in this empty, half-collapsed old stable. He stretched his shirtless, broad frame and winced at the knots and bruises that covered his body. At least he was in one piece, and without holes after being shot at and falling from the second floor of a building, not to mention half drowned and sucked into a time-traveling vortex. He couldn't remember how far he had run last night to find this dilapidated shelter at the edge of town, but it had felt a safe distance from the Navy men who were hunting him. He looked around now in the light of day to find something that might be of use to him, like a coat or shoes, but the place was cleaned out of anything of value. Thatch carefully lifted several large boards aside to exit the stable. The rain and drizzle from the night before were gone. He took a deep breath of the new crisp air that was warmed by the sun. Thatch spied several Chinese men and women pushing carts filled with goods of varying sorts through the alleyway he had found himself in. The cart pushers barely gave him a second glance, as if they were used to seeing vagrants emerging from the trash on a regular basis without their clothes. He watched as two carts bumped into one another, with several pairs from one falling to the ground. The two Chinese women argued and shouted at each other while a watchful young Chinese boy swiftly picked up two of the pairs before they knew they were missing. He then continued his way further down the alleyway toward Thatch. "Oi, boy, come here," Thatch said, as the boy was rounding a corner with his contraband. Thatch followed, and when he turned the corner, a heavy-set Chinese man in a white apron dusted with flour had a hold of the boy's arm and was yelling at him in Chinese. The boy was struggling to escape as the man slapped him hard on the head. Thatch stalked directly toward the two. "Oi!" he yelled as he approached. The Chinese man looked up at Thatch with annoyance that turned to fright and confusion as the pirate closed the distance between them. Thatch stood almost a head taller than the portly man, who was clearly a baker, and put on his most devilish scowl to impress that he was no one to be trifled with. Without another word, Thatch grabbed the man by his thick throat and pushed him against the building. He, in turn, smacked the man on the head, sending him sprawling to the ground. The man yelled a few choice Chinese curses and then ran off. The boy, seeing the man run off, turned around, about to run himself, then stalled for a moment, seeing the towering, bearded, shirtless sight of Thatch. His eyes went wide, and he turned too late to make a getaway as Thatch was able to grab his arm. The boy was a second from yelling out when Thatch held his hand up to his face with a finger to his lips to shush him. The boy was frozen with fear, and Thatch held out his other hand to him. The boy looked at him, then his pears. He dropped one of the golden-colored fruits into Thatch's hand. Smiling, Thatch took a bite from the ripened pear. Juices ran into his beard, and he happily savored the sweet flavor. Without letting go, he looked at the boy's round face. "Speak English, lad." The boy looked hesitantly at him before nodding his head. "I ain't going to hit you like that one. A fellow has to eat, right?" The boy slowly nodded. "Yes. What's your name?" "Tom," said the boy, almost like his reply was a question. "Tom," Thatch said with a chuckle. "Not a very good Chinese name." "All right, Tom, I'm in need of a good thief. A local, one who knows the lay of the land, mind you. You seem to be qualified in my eyes." Tom looked frantically away as Thatch continued to eat his pear one-handed, still holding the boy's arm. He struggled a bit in an attempt to break away, but Thatch's grip was like iron around his skinny arm. The boy held up the other pear in offering to Thatch, but Thatch just shook his head. "Pirate code. Plunder is always split evenly. You heard of pirates?" Tom nodded his head yes. "Well, young Mr. Tom, you are looking at the most feared and famous pirate in all the Caribbean," Thatch said, with a twinkle in his lively eyes. He tossed the finished pair over his shoulder, let the boy's arm go, and wiped his hand on his breeches. The boy looked confused and was ready to bolt. Thatch smiled big and held out his freshly dried hand for Tom to shake. "Blackbeard at your service," Thatch said, as the boy focused on the immense black beard covering his face. "Can you guess how I acquired the name?" He laughed. "Heard of me?" Tom shook his head no. "Well, we are a long way from Nassau. No matter. Seeing how I saved your hide from that overweight bilge rat, you are now owing me a debt. I'm short on crew as of late, so I hereby anoint you with the honor of being my cabin boy. It is a very prestigious job aboard ship, running errands for the captain, carrying important messages and relaying them to the crew." Thatch looked around the alleyway. It seemed that Chinese people completely occupied the neighborhood he found himself in. The shops and doorways held signs in handwriting that were only displaying Chinese symbols. The men and women dressed in unusual attire that featured sandals and long braided hair for the men, as well as brimmed hats or headbands. Their slacks extended down to their ankles, and most wore long-sleeve shirts similar to button-up blouses, but without the buttons. These shirts overlapped in the front and were held together by a belt. The shirts had sleeves that were unusually wide at the wrists. Thatch crossed his arms over his hairy chest and looked down at his dirty, bare feet. "I'm in need of dress at the moment, young Tom. Your first job as a new pirate recruit is to procure your captain some clothing." The boy looked around at the small Chinese men that moved about the area, then sized up Thatch. "Yeah, not going to find something to my liking here. I have a bit of a fancier taste than what I see. Any ideas, lad?" Tom nodded and smiled. He then led the way through the twisting and turning alleyways. Thatch stood across the street from a building that held a laundry store run by Chinese immigrants. Tom had told him that his mother had worked in this store before she was killed in a fire that had happened here almost a year ago. The store had been rebuilt, and he knew the layout of the building well, as it hadn't changed once they had completed the repairs. Thatch looked around the busy street and noticed a few men coming and going from the laundry that looked to be of a well-to-do type. A few of the men were armed with the same sort of weapons he had seen last night at the saloon, pistols held in leather holsters at their hips. He even saw belted holsters that were dyed to match their outfits of black and brown colors. He longed to possess one of those pistols that had a multitude of shots contained in the one firearm. This line of thinking brought him back to the duel between that young local and Calico Jack. Thatch only knew Jack by reputation and second-hand association. They had each sailed the same ports, but had never interacted throughout the last couple of years. Jack's reputation was one of cunning and backstabbing. He had long heard that Calico wasn't a great fighter or naval tactician, but did well leading men and women with his charisma. Thatch guffed to himself. These stories seemed especially true after seeing him easily gunned down by that James fellow. I guess his charisma wasn't as big of an asset in this new age. Thatch needed to arm himself before he ventured back to look for his fellow pirates. Those Navy men who broke into his room last night surely made off with all his weapons that he had left behind. He would need to be well prepared before he met up with them again. He could still recall the scarred-faced man that glared at him out the window after he had fallen to the street. It dawned on him at this moment who that man must have been. Woods Rogers, the pirate hunter. Thatch had heard stories of him recently, as news spread through the Caribbean, that Rogers was the one tasked with offering and enforcing the king's pardon. Woods was said to have a wicked scar from being shot in the face during a battle with a Spanish galleon. The man had made a name for himself first as a privateer, then more recently as a pirate hunter protecting the interests of merchants and the crown. He pushed aside the question of how Woods and his Navy men had come to be at the same time and place as Thatch and his pirates. Time. His head hurt to dwell on that subject. The idea of a new time, while difficult to believe, seemed the only logical answer to the new world he currently found himself in. This thought made him more conscious of his lack of protection. It would be folly for him to remain unarmed much longer in this violent city. Once his cabin boy returned with something for him to wear, he would set about procuring one of those advanced pistols for himself. Thatch watched as Tom emerged from a back door in the alley of the laundry store with a satchel slung over his shoulder. The boy had a satisfied smile on his face as he approached Thatch with his plunder. "You made that look easy, lad." Tom set the bag down on an empty crate for Thatch to look through. "They's so busy there, no one noticed me. Think I just delivery boy," Tom said. Thatch pulled the articles from the bag, holding up each one. Ankle-length black dress trousers, white shirt, black vest, necktie, thigh-length frock coat, and last to come out were polished black boots. "You've done well, boy, very well." Thatch held the sole of one boot up to his foot and was pleased that it would be a match. "Good lad." Thatch took several minutes to dress himself in the clothes, as the boy motioned to him on the correct way to tie the necktie. Thatch straightened out his clothes and then walked around the corner of the alley to a shop window. He eyed his reflection in the window. It was a dashing outfit despite the lack of color. He would have preferred a bit of red to invoke a little extravagance, but now he didn't look so out of place. His wild hair and beard still managed to create a dichotomy of image. The boy stood next to him in his worn, bland Chinese dress, and it fouled his mood. "Oi! You are a disgraceful-looking cabin boy. Have you no pride? I will remind you that you are now part of the crew of the most fearsome and prized ship in the Caribbean, the Queen Anne's Revenge, and your Captain Blackbeard will not tolerate his cabin boy looking like some scullery maid." Blackbeard looked down with a menacing look to Tom. "Now get back in there and find yourself a suitable dress before I throw you overboard to the sharks." The light of day streamed through the warehouse window high on the wall that Charlotte de Barry had climbed through last night. But those rays of sunlight that highlighted the dust motes floating through the air were not what woke her and her pirate friends. It was the loud clamoring of the warehouse door as it was pushed open by the first workers to arrive this morning that sent them all sitting bolt upright, reaching for their pistols and cutlasses. 3 Italian men in rapid-fire conversation with each other in their native language were so shocked to see the motley group of pirates standing before them, pointing various weapons of death and dismemberment, that one let out the scream of a little girl, and another dropped his lunch tin, spilling its contents on the floor. The men slowly raised their hands to prove that they were in submission, and stood stock still. "Gather our things. It's time to go," said Hornigold as he pointed 2 flintlock pistols at the men. Mary and Anne stuffed the pirates' belongings into a couple of burlap sacks, and they all moved to exit the warehouse, while Hornigold and Black Caesar guarded the workers. Charlotte picked up an apple from the spilt lunchbox and crunched it as she walked past the men. "Call out or follow, and I'll have your hearts for breakfast," Hornigold said, with a finger slashing across his throat to make his point before he and Black Caesar closed the warehouse door behind them, leaving the 3 frightened and confused men inside. The pirates made their way down the dusty streets of San Francisco's Marina District in their new clothing, and only garnered a few looks because of their wild hair and strange weapons strapped to their bodies. The early hour of the morning brought in a bustle of workers, merchants, and horse-driven vehicles. It brought a sense of awe to their eyes, as they had never imagined such a frenzy of commerce flowing through one port of call. The scale and quantity of ships in the harbor were truly breathtaking in the light of day. "I've never seen such plunder ripe for the taking. Hornigold, do you see cannons on any of these ships?" Charlotte asked. They stopped to gaze out toward the crowded harbor, eyeing the iron and wooden ships that were moored at the docks or lay at anchor on the calm bay. They all scanned the hulls looking for the cylinder outlines of cannon barrels, but the portholes, if there were any, were empty of any armaments. "Not a one I see," Black Caesar commented. "There, what in the Lord's name is that beast?" Mary pointed at a metal hulk moored to the dock, whose deck was a mere 18 inches above the waterline. There was a round iron turret 10 feet high and 15 feet in diameter that rose from the middle of the low deck and featured 2 15-inch guns protruding menacingly out of holes in its sides. The guns looked enormous in comparison to the 3 to 4-inch guns that you would find on the typical sloop of war. There were 2 men on the deck in uniforms consisting of white pants, blue vests, and jackets, with a blue cap on their heads. They each held a long rifle in their hands and stood ramrod straight with watchful eyes as workers passed them on the dock. "What kind of ship is that?" "It has no room for cargo or crew," Anne commented. "A floating cannon is all, with munitions of the like I've never seen." "Could be more to it below the waterline. Built to sink ships, that one," said Hornigold. "How does it move with no sails?" asked Mary. "It has one of those chimneys like the other iron ships." Hornigold didn't finish his thought. "Look," Mary called out, pointing further past the docks. They turned toward Mary's gaze, spotting the back of a lone Charles Vane with his head on a swivel searching the streets. They quickened their pace to catch up. "Vane!" Hornigold called out. Charles turned, and a note of relief crossed his face. He stopped and waited for the others to catch up with him. "I wasn't sure I'd see you scallywags again," Vane said as they reached him. Vane looked them all up and down, noticing their new but drab attire. "Decided to give up piracy and work in fields, have you?" Vane laughed and tugged on Hornigold's shirt. "Where have you been? What happened after we left last night?" Hornigold asked. "I found me a nice, pretty waitress girl to lay with. Thatch did as well. Jennings, the pious bastard, sat and drank in a sour mood. Well, then later, after I delivered my graces to the girl, there was a shot rang out from the hallway. I looked out my door and seen the wretched face of the pirate hunter Rogers and several of his Navy men come from Thatch's room. I don't think they got him because Woods had a face of rage, not that his could ever look pleasant. The girl showed me a back way out, and I escaped. Came down to the docks and slept in a skiff. Where did you lot get off to, besides burying poor Jack Rackham?" "When we came back from laying Jack to rest, we'd seen Woods and a few Navy men out front of the Paris looking fairly friendly with your Captain Jennings," Charlotte said. "Jennings wanted the king's pardon. That is already known. He'd be happy to sign and retire back to his fancy plantation. Not me. I'm not done pirating. What did the Crown ever do for me? He knew I wouldn't sign that damned document. He'd been meeting with that pirate hunter for a few days before all this." Vane spit. "Then Thatch lives?" asked Hornigold. "In the dark night he lived. Not sure if he still walks the light of day," Vane said with a shrug of his shoulders. "We should steal ourselves a ship and sail away from this dreadful place." "What of me, Captain?" Black Caesar said. "I cannot leave him here to face the pirate hunter and his men alone." Vane began walking off toward the marina, with the others following. "He ain't my captain," Vane said. "We need more than the 6 of us to take a ship and sail her out of here. We have no idea where Bellamy and Roberts are either," Hornigold said. "6 of us can take one of these small ships," Vane said. "We don't need them. Besides, should we stay here and risk Woods Rogers and his navy finding us?" Charlotte stopped and put her hand on Black Caesar's shoulder, and the rest stopped as well. "We need to vote on what we do next. Pirate code?" Charlotte said. "Aye, let's put it to a vote," Hornigold agreed. Vane rolled his eyes skyward and let out a sigh of frustration. "We are not on a ship, and we are not members of the same crew. I'll be damned if I will let my fate be decided by the soft hearts of your lot. We have been drowned, stranded, and pursued to the end of the world, with the pirate hunter and his navy at our heels. It's time to escape while we can, rather than stay here to search for 3 scurvy lost souls in a strange city that's near the size of London herself." "We will vote, as is the pirate way. Ship or no ship," said Mary. "Who votes to stay and find the others at all costs?" Hornigold, Charlotte, Mary, and Black Caesar raised their hands while Vane stood fuming. Mary looked around quickly with surprise on her face. "Where's Anne?" They all turned and looked around the crowded streets, searching for the red locks of Anne Bonny. "Anne!" called Mary. Anne was nowhere to be found as they looked desperately to and fro. She had disappeared somewhere in the crowd. Black Caesar hopped up onto a parked carriage and looked around from his high perch. He scanned the streets and docks for a sign of the young woman, but was unable to spot her. He leapt down and shook his head. "This god-forsaken place will swallow the rest of us if we don't leave now," Vane bellowed. "First Bellamy and Roberts, then Thatch and now Bonny. Should we lie here and wait for our doom? I call for a re-vote." I hope you're enjoying this historical fiction book with pirates and time travel all wound together in it. You can find the ebook and physical books at my website, briancantrell.com. You can also find the second book in this series, Pirates of World War II. And if you're a fan of pirates, you can check out thepiraterepublic.com. It's a weekly newsletter that I put out every Friday. All sorts of great pirate history, events, news, and happenings. You can also toss a few doubloons our way by joining our Patreon at Patreon, The Pirate Republic. We'll see you next week. Till then, fair winds and keep a weathered eye.